we need to create films that engage and entertain, but also what is Canadian identity? What does a Canadian film really mean? Our films do not have to be the same. We need to elevate them. They need these films need to be the kind of films that internationally people want to watch. This episode is sponsored by Pelleplat.
This week, I have the pleasure of interviewing my co-host Anthony Epp, who's quietly been building one of the most ambitious film projects in the country. Anthony is an award-winning Canadian filmmaker, producer, and entrepreneur with over 15 years of experience in the film and television industry. He's worked in nearly every crew role: director, writer, producer, assistant director, production manager, and even gaffer, bringing a rare 360-degree perspective to how great films are made on tight budgets and even tighter timelines. In 2022, Anthony released his debut feature film, 13 Miles, a triathlon drama shot across British Columbia. The film was produced through Habbathy Film Productions, the company he co-founded with his partner and wife, Helena Tom. 13 Miles is now available on major platforms including Amazon, Tubi, and Apple TV. In 2024, Anthony completed his entertainment law certificate from Osgoode Hall Law School, further strengthening his unique ability to navigate both the creative and business sides of independent film. Anthony is currently in development on his second feature, The Quiet Canadians, a modern-day spy thriller shot coast to coast from Vancouver to Halifax with a distinctly Canadian lens and international scope. Through Habbathy Films, he's building a fan-focused Canadian entrepreneurial studio model inspired by a new wave of audience-backed cinema. He also writes Filmmaker's Notebook, a weekly email newsletter that helps indie filmmakers navigate the art and business of getting films made. Anthony, welcome to Off the Lot.
It is a pleasure to be here, and I am excited to be on the hot seat this time.
Yeah, exactly. Last week it was me. That was a lot of fun. I had a great time talking about, all things my career. Who doesn't love talking about themselves? But now it's your turn. And I'm excited because listeners have tuned into the show for the past few months now, and they hear us talking to other guests about what their backgrounds are and how they got into it, but they don't really maybe know too much about us. And so you have, as I just described, a crazy background, and I'd love to dive into all of that and all the things you're working on. So why don't we talk about your origin story? How did you get into film in the first place, and how did you end up doing all of those jobs?
I don't think I come from necessarily a traditional film background. I started what I guess you could arguably say quite late in the game based on sort of conversations with my peers, if you will. I went to film school when I was 35 years old, and a lot of the students that I was in class with were 19, 20, 21. So I was really doing quite a bit of a reset at that time. It was interesting because I made that decision to go. I had been working, variety of sort of adult jobs, if you will, for many years. And my career path at that time was to be a financial advisor. In fact, that's what I had been doing since about 2000 I was a financial advisor. And so I sold insurance. I did investment planning, financial planning with people. I had built a relatively I would say a modest career out of that, and was enjoying myself. But I always thought to myself, this just wasn't what I was meant to do. It harkened back to when I was a kid. I loved playing with action figures. I remember when I was a kid, when we were learning animation in school, and learning how to do little stick drawings and movements and things like that, and how exciting that was, and how playing with action figures and pretending to be reenacting scenes from Star Wars movies and so on were so fascinating to me. And I love telling stories. And so it was just a storytelling, anything that I could do to tell a story was really what fascinated me. And so I was going for a walk downtown one day, and I happened to walk by the Vancouver Film School. And I thought to myself, I've always wanted to explore what it would be like to get into the film industry. So I made a couple of phone calls and got to see one of their advisors. I realized at that point, I was like, well, this feels like the right place, the right thing to start doing now. Now, whether or not I want to go to film school or not, I wasn't quite sure at the time, but I also didn't know any other pathway in, right? At that time, YouTube and all these other things were still very new to the table. And so you couldn't really learn much. And I didn't really know anybody in the industry, or at least not anybody who I could reasonably call on to give me any kind of advice or anything like that. And so it seemed to me at the time that film school was really the way for me to break out of what I was doing and jump into this full bore. And so I took the money I had saved to put down a down payment on a condo in Gastown, And
You're regretting that now, though, right? With the with the housing prices and what they are.
yeah, Gastown condo was probably about, I think they were, is if I remember correctly, it was like $350,000 or something like that. It was kind of like 350, $400,000 was basically the cost of the to go down. And so I had like just enough to put a down payment down. And I was thinking to myself, that was definitely the way to go. But then, I regret it from the, maybe I'd be wealthier right now than I was. But I also think I would have locked myself into something that I knew I wasn't going to stay in, or I knew I couldn't stay in and have an enjoyable life. So it was really a leap of faith, and the real crux of it came when, when I went to tell my folks that I wanted to explore this path. My mom and my dad both basically said, well, that makes perfect sense, that's what you should have been doing all along. That was a real vote of confidence, I would say, in the decision I was about to make, because I really had no idea what this meant. Even the idea of going back to school at 35 is somewhat daunting for most people. There's a little bit of humble pie and a little bit of realizing that you're now going to be in classrooms with effectively teenagers. That was kind of a bit of humble pie to do. But I thought to myself, look, if I'm going to do this, I've got to do this full bore. Like I can't wade in halfway, because if I wade in halfway, I'm never going to go. I'm never going to do it. I'll dabble. I might work on set a couple times, but I'll always be drawn back to, oh yeah, but I have a condo to pay for, and I have this to pay. Like there's always going to be something that's going to prevent me from kicking in. And so the funny part is that I didn't really even have to take too much of that to go to school, but because I wound up getting their scholarship through Vancouver Film School, and I went through their foundation program first, which it's kind of the entry level position, if you will, the entry level to getting in. And the wonderful part about going to foundation before going to film production was I was introduced to the entire world of art and visual design. So I got to explore life drawing, like doing life drawing for about half a year. I learned how to paint. I learned how to take photographs and tell stories through still images, learned how to storyboard, and we did some screenwriting classes and we did some acting classes. So there was filmmaking as a part of it, which was always the goal that I wanted. Was I wanted to be I thought, well, I want to be a filmmaker, but I was exploring all of these other avenues at the same time. I was exploring, animation. We did 2D animation and we did 3D animation. I got introduced for 3 months to Maya and got to play around and made a goldfish swim in a bowl kind of thing. That really opened my eyes to the bigger world of just making visually interesting storytelling. And a lot of it was geared towards, pushing people into other programs with VFS. But, and a lot of the classmates that I had were really good animators, like really good animators. And a lot of them wound up going into 3D animation and so on. And I always knew my path was going to be, I wanted to get into narrative filmmaking. That was where I thought my path was really going to be. But what was interesting about going to foundation too is, like, I never saw myself as a person who could draw, and I never saw myself as a person who had any quality, like any kind of talent or skill in these kind of fields. Once I went there, I realized it just didn't matter. Like, it didn't matter that I couldn't draw. I learned to draw. I taught myself to draw, and I sort of peeled back the onion. I had really good instructors who just were like, who were not easy on me, but they were also very encouraging. Like, they would be the kind of people who I could tell, like, my life drawing of a nude sitting in the middle, live nude sitting in the middle of the classroom, was by far and away, on the low end of the spectrum in terms of skill level, compared to like the person sitting right next to me. Like, I could see what he was doing, or I could see what she was doing, and just go like, holy man, like, I am way out of my league here. But I was having fun and I was really enjoying it. And I just loved the idea of getting better at this. And that was something that just really kept encouraging me. I was like, well, every day I'm just getting better at doing this stuff. I went to film school after that. I went right into film production right as soon as I finished the foundation program, and that changed a lot of my perspective, because now we got into the technical side of things. So I made a point of myself, once I kind of saw how the layout of the program was going to be, that I wanted to do as many jobs on set as possible. We had an opportunity in film school to make a documentary in your first term, you work on 2 short films in your third term, and you work on 2 short films in kind of your fifth and sixth terms. And I was like, I want to make sure I do a different job on every set. So I don't want to take on just one thing. So I did assistant directing, I did directing, I did producing on one, and then the last one that we did, which we were able to shoot on Super 16 film, I got to be the cinematographer, which was really cool. And of course, this is in a time we didn't have video taps or anything like that. So being the cinematographer on a film shoot, you had to do a lot of mental training to do that, because you had to plan out everything, and you had to know that it was going to work, and go from there. And I really felt cool about it, because again, it was something where I kept thinking to myself, am I really getting better at this? I still always felt like I had imposter syndrome in it. Like, who am I at this age? I'm a far more money person. Like, I know more about like financial stuff. I can do budgets, I can do Excel sheets, and I'm here trying to be an artist. And I always felt like I had this imposter syndrome between being an artist and being a finance person. And that for me, I constantly was trying to not to prove to other people, but to prove to myself, like, no, 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 you belong here. Like, you're okay here. I learned that by just like being on set with other film productions. Like, I would volunteer when possible to work on the classes above me would always be doing their projects. And so I was always trying to get on their sets as like a PA on a weekend or something like that, and just see how they were putting these things together. I volunteered for a Crazy Eight film. It was when Crazy Eights kind of started to come back, and it was like I knew a guy who was producing one of the Crazy Eights films, and I said, "Well, I'd love to come out and help one day." And this was on a weekend while I was still in film school. And so he said, "Okay, we'll come out and you can PA and just like help clean up garbage." I was like, "Cool, I'm in. Like, bring me on board." It was called The Green Film. It was basically about the idea of making an eco-friendly film set. And that's basically what it was. It was a film about making a film in an eco-friendly way. We had just like the best people working on this particular film. And it was the very first time the red camera had been used in BC. And so even the DP at that time was like, how do I use this camera? And so we were shooting on a red, and the red broke down, as reds did. And so we had to get the duplicate. So it was always funny, because that the coin phrase of like oh, another red problem, and so on. And red cameras are great, but at that time they were definitely glitchy.
Yeah, now they're great. They fixed that problem. But back then, we also, when we were shooting, you had to have two cameras.
Something always went wrong, and people were always like going, I don't know what do we do here. Basically, the crew I worked with were the crew who were kind of like working on Stargate and stuff like that. Like, they were working on the bigger TV shows in town. And we shot at Bridge Studios for 2 days on the weekend, and we actually got permission to shoot on the Stargate set on the visual effects stage, the old visual effects stage that they had there. So we filmed an entire scene on that, and it was set up as like a medieval village, and we filmed on their set. I remember like one of the days for like 3 hours, basically they said, okay, we're setting up a giant 20 by 20 diffusion, whatever you call it. Like, yeah, now it escapes me. But the thing is, because it was outside and we didn't have enough sandbags, so I had to stand on the junior for like basically, or the combo for like basically like 3 hours, to make sure it didn't fly away. That's what they told me to do. So I just sat there and I was like, okay, just bring me. People just brought me like water and food and stuff like that, and I was like, well, this is fun. This is a way to spend your day. And then I got kind of brought into, when we went to the Stargate set, I got brought onto the lighting team to help them out, because we had enough PAs there. And so they were like, okay, well, why don't you come work on the lighting team? And so I went on the lighting team. And I remember what happened was, is our 20K HMI, which is like a big light that's essentially designed to make the interior look like we're outside in the sky, makes it feel like you're outside. And I remember it shorted, and the gaffer that was working on the film, he's like, okay, so like we don't have light, we don't have that sunlight now. And so, but he said, but if you go across the lot to the other stage over there, they're filming Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus. Go to the store, grab a case of beer, go to that set, and see if we can borrow one of their lights. And so I drove to the store, grabbed a case of beer, came back, and went over, and they told me to talk to, I can't remember the guy's name. Told me to talk to a guy, and the guy, and so I did. And I went and talked to him, and he's like, sure, just like, just bring it back when you guys are done. Like, make sure you roll it back. Don't leave it over at that other stage. I'm on the Dr. Parnassus set, and I'm looking at all the people up there filming this bigger, much bigger thing. And now me and like three other guys are like rolling this 20K over from their set to the visual effects stage. Anyway, this whole thing was just like, I was like, okay, so this is filmmaking. Like, it was just such a cool environment, and this is what it is. And so I did film school. I did the cinematography. I did all this stuff. I got out of that. I talked to a teacher there who was more into documentaries. I would go back and forth, and I'd have like lunch with him every once in a while after I finished film school. and this was in 2009. And I remember at that time I was like trying to come up with an idea for a documentary. For some reason I thought, oh, I'm going to see, because people were saying, oh, you know what, one thing you should try to get into is documentary right now, especially because we'd just come out of that writer's strike of 2008, and people were saying that, documentaries might be a better way into the industry right now because the industry is kind of slow and all these other things. So I came up with this idea for a documentary about hockey fighting, like hockey fighters. And I always saw them as like sort of this like the gladiators of the sport kind of thing. And, we're going to try to get interviews with famous hockey fighters and kind of find out what their philosophy was, and like why did they find themselves in that role and things like that as a player. Because obviously, like most hockey players growing up, you don't grow up with this idea of being a hockey fighter. You grow up as a wanting to be Wayne Gretzky. Like that's kind of how you want to do it. And this kind of harkens back to, again, this idea of like playing with action figures. What I used to do as a kid, like I never played hockey growing up, but what I did do, I loved hockey as a sport. I loved watching it. I loved the storytelling behind it. I always loved, like, if there was a person who I wanted to get to the game an hour earlier so I could go into the bowels of the Coliseum and see like the Zamboni, like Zamboni driver. I would never leave my seat if I went to a hockey game. Like I just loved staying in the seat. For me, watching the Zamboni drive around and scrape the ice was as sometimes as interesting as watching the game. And I loved just watching all of the behind the scenes of how that worked. Like, how did it work? I really wanted to learn how do they make hockey, like how does hockey ice get done. Anyway, this idea of storytelling was, I would take, like, when I was a kid, I would take chess pieces, and my dad created this like kind of semi-glass plastic hockey rink that was like a board, almost like a board game. And I would take chess pieces and I would like put little helmets on them made out of paper, and I would like reenact hockey games every Saturday night. For me, it was the story of the game. Like I was creating a story of how the game was going to turn out. And I would create little like fights between pawns on the ice, things like that. And I loved just watching like the fire sale of gear all over the place. And it was fun. I'd kick around a little puck that was the funny part was we had a table hockey game, but I much preferred playing with these chess pieces. I didn't know I was directing the story, but I was, as I look back on it, that's what I was thinking at that time. So anyway, getting forward to this documentary, I pitched this idea to the VFS teacher, and he happened to have a relationship with Super Channel. He said, "Well, write this up as a treatment, write this up as a story, and we'll take it to Super Channel." And Super Channel said, "Okay, if you guys can do this, but Anthony, you're just gonna work on this. Like you're not anything on this, but we like your idea, so you'll get a writing credit as a writer of the documentary. But obviously, like Shell, who was the producer, he's going to produce it." And I was like, "Okay, sure. This sounds great." So we got some funding from Super Channel and some other places, and Shell took me through this all about learning how to finance a project through the Canadian system, because a documentary and a feature are different but similar in how they get financed. I mean, you can go to different avenues to get money, but the idea is still the same. And this idea of like blended financing, and like there isn't just like $250,000 sitting there waiting for someone to go and make a movie. You've got to like do this and this and this, and you've got to make sure that this is happening before this happens. It's almost like a whole thing where everything happens on one day because nothing can happen until the other thing is happening. So everything is reliant on each other. Yeah, it's like selling a house in a way where it's like, nothing gets transferred until everything is in place in that one moment. And so I really learned a lot. And Shell gave me a really good piece of advice at the time. He said, your financial services background is probably going to do you a lot more good than your film school background. And I thought, oh, interesting. Okay. And I really learned that because the budget, like managing the budget and managing the cash flow and everything like that was actually a super important aspect of making a film. And so fast forward, we made the film, learned a lot, and learned a lot about making that film, like just learned a lot about the process of delivery and all these other things. When Super Channel went bankrupt, and the first time it went bankrupt, when it went bankrupt, and the only thing that was holding our film, that made our film still valid for them, that they still had to create the license, was if we hit the deadline. Like we had to make sure we fulfilled the terms of the contract. Well, so we had to rush to get the film completed and over to them and delivered to them by the deadline, because if not, there could be an argument that because the bankruptcy court and so on was like, okay, well, if we don't have to pay something, we're not going to pay it. And so I'm sitting there at I can't even remember the post studio because it doesn't exist anymore, but I'm sitting there at the post studio waiting for them to output an HD tape on a Friday, so that I can take it over to FedEx because it has to get to Toronto by Saturday morning. This is like my own pocket paying for this because we have zero money left in the bank for this. So I'm just like I'm sitting there at the post house, and like outputting an HD copy is means you have to play the whole thing. You know, it has to record the whole thing, and it has to, you know, go through a QC check. QC, quality control check. And so like I had to make sure all of that was in place, and it's like afternoon, and I'm like, okay, the overnight delivery for FedEx to Toronto is cut off at like 4:30, I think, or something like that, or at that time. I have about a 15-minute window to get before, if there's any traffic, I might not hit the deadline, kind of thing. And I'm racing over to FedEx to like get it in the mail, get like the confirmation, send it over to Super Channel and say, okay, confirmed, here it is. It's in the pipeline. And then I was like watching it for like 24 hours to make sure that like see when it got delivered and so on, just to make sure it got delivered. And of course it did, and everything was fine. Like I got used to stress there very quickly.
But that's great. So you finished this documentary. You got it in on time. That's great. And then how did you get into like narrative and like supervising producer and producer AD? What was the path there?
Moving that story along, I think it was actually like you, Chad Fitz, and myself were sitting on an alumni panel at VFS, I think at one point, were we? They were looking to rejig the program. So they're asking for our advice. And that's when we all reconnected. It was about a year after that. And we all reconnected. And then I wound up, I went back, and it was you or Chad who were working on Sanctuary.
Chad was on Stargate in the office, and then I took over for him in the office when he went to set to become a Tad. I helped out on Sanctuary for like a week or something like that, very, very like early stages. But then that's, I think, when I put you in touch with George Horry, right?
That's it. So you were the one who got you. So you are the reason I have a career.
Oh, well, no, come on. You sold a movie to Super Channel right before that. Yeah. So
I sold the movie to Super Channel right before that. And then the script coordinator on Sanctuary was going on mat leave. We had just had this alumni panel, and you said, "Hey, I should put you in touch with George Horry because they're looking for someone to take over." And so I went in and interviewed with George, and George liked me, and George doesn't like lots of people. So as we both know, I love George. George introduced me to Martin Wood, Amanda Tapping, and Damien Kindler, who was the showrunner, and I interviewed with them, and they liked me, or liked me enough. It was so funny because I went in there and I interviewed. I wore like a full suit because I thought you interview, like for my corporate land, you interview wearing a suit. And I walked in there and people are in shorts and t-shirts, and I was like, okay, so I'm clearly way overdressed for this. And I remember George saying, okay, so when you go to talk to Martin, Amanda, and Damien, you don't need to wear a suit. But I wore a suit to meet with George. And so I met with them. They liked me, and I got hired, and I became a script coordinator on Sanctuary for the third and the fourth seasons of that show. I also was the executive assistant to Damien Kindler, to Martin Wood, and to Amanda Tapping. So they were really like kind of like became my first mentors in the narrative space, where like, Damien would really talk to me about like writing stories, and then Martin was really obviously the director and everything like that, and Amanda was just like the presence of everything. Like she almost was like the glue of all of this and pulled it together. But I also had to learn how to script coordinate because I didn't even know that was a job. Like there's so many things to script coordinating the cool part about it is that you're in the writer's room. So I mean, effectively, you're part, at least when I did it, you're sort of part writer's assistant. You're also making sure that you are formatting the script properly for television, making sure that all of the scene numbers make sense. But then on the other side of it, you're also like watching for logic flaws. And you're kind of like, you're trying to be like that final set of eyes on the script before it gets shared with the network or shared with other people. And you're trying to make the writers, make sure that the writer's work looks presentable, basically, to the powers that be. So really early on, I was spending my time, like I was digging through the script and I was trying to like make sure that the logic made sense. And then I would ask the writer to have a meeting and like sit down with them for an hour and go like, okay, so just, I want to make sure I understand this properly. Can you help, does this work? Does this work? Does this work? And so we started having conversations with all the writers about what their thought process was, and seeing how everybody operated in the writer's room. And that just became such a fun way of life for so long. So at the end of season 3, we were over at the Norco stages in Burnaby, and we were going to go on like a few month hiatus before season 4 because we still didn't know if we were greenlit or not, but we still had a lease on the stages there. And so George asked me to kind of like basically to stay on semi part-time, like 4 days a week, and just sort of like be there in case people wanted to tour the stages for filming and stuff while we were gone. So I basically would would sit there. And during that time, like it was me in accounting and post production. That was it. Those were the only people in the building. So you see how a set goes from like 100 people working every single day to like 4 people in accounting and, post production and everything like that. And during that time, I I would walk around the sets, the sanctuary sets every day. Part of it was for practical purposes, I had to see if there was any pipes leaking or making sure that the lights worked and all those kinds of things, like do maintenance on it. But the other part of it too was for me, I was like walking around and I was like feeling the foam that they used to make the caves and like looking at how the sets were designed and things like that. I'm now getting kind of like this idea of like, late at night, here's how things work. And that was really cool. And I mean, as a script coordinator, I got to go to set a lot. I got to basically be the liaison between writers and production. And I really learned the AD role really well, which is then I started to really take that role on more in like part-time, like off season and stuff like that. I would do like a lot of ADing for short films just because I was really enjoying this. While I was doing this, I knew some people from, I can't remember how, but I got brought on to this feature film called Death Do Us Part. And they needed some help in the lighting department.
Like that was like Nicholas Humphreys, right?
Yeah, I wound up coming on as like a helper in the lighting department. They needed like 3 people in the lighting department. I came on as a helper. Well, I guess the gaffer at that time, like he basically dropped out just before, or he wound up getting another job, so he could only be there for like half the time, but it was going to be the second half of the shoot. And so I wound up getting elevated up to being the best boy or best person. And then for one reason or another, I found myself in the gaffer role for like 5 days on set. And so they gave me the gaffer role. And I'm like sitting there like, oh crap, I don't know nearly enough about this to be a gaffer. But I'm just gonna keep my head down. And I turned to the DP, who was Chris Kempensky, and he's a really lovely person. And I just said, look, I'm gonna be totally honest with you. I don't want to drag you down. If I come to you asking for questions, it's legitimately because it's the first time I've ever done this role before. Like I've done cinematography before, but I know I haven't done it to the level that you might be expecting. So I if you guys need to find someone else, I'm only doing it for the first half of the shoot because the gaffer that they had is coming back and he'll do the full shoot. I'll do my best to help you get through this first 5 or 6 days of the shoot. Any help you can provide or any like guidance or whatever, I'm open to whatever you have to say about it. And he said, okay. He said, and so he would take me through things and he would like tell me the lingo of like what different equipment was called, when he asked for something and I'd look at him and I'd say like, and he'd say, oh, it's a plug. There's always this little lingo stuff that comes in. But at any rate, so I worked hard enough and I learned enough there.
Kind of like bounced really around basically from script coordinating. You were on set as an electrician, best boy, an AD. You've been doing all of these things. You've collected all of this information and all of this knowledge of how to make things. And I'd love to like dive into, you made your first feature. What was that like, putting that together and taking all of this and getting that? And then also I want to dive into your company and where you are now.
All of this is sort of happening around the same time. Like while I'm gaffing on that, I had met Helena, who's my wife now and my business partner, and we had started talking about making a movie together.
It would be more romantic if they stayed together.
The door would not stay afloat.
It's a movie, not a documentary.
Are you insane, bro? It was a real life tragedy.
Why are you so obsessed with tragedy?
Here's an idea. Why don't the two of you take your hot takes to Pelleplat? They're holding a contest for people like you. Plus, there's cash prizes.
Game on.
So, who won?
Straight away.
We both won. Yeah, we found our people.
Perfect. By the way, what about the end of Inception?
Don't even.
No,
I know you're
listen,
gonna start,
no,
but I have
no,
a ton.
you need to look at
Pelleplat Writing Challenges, where passionate minds meet. Join today at pelleplat.com.
We had all these ideas of what kind of movie we want to make together, and and then it all came down to this idea of like, okay, I was like, well, we were about to go volunteer at the Ironman Canada in Penticton because I knew some friends, and I had competed in the Ironman. I had done the Ironman twice in my life, and I was a marathon runner and everything like that. So I was kind of in that world, and I thought I'd really love to make a movie like kind of about people in the triathlon world, people in the Ironman world. And Helena was game because she had we'd gone a couple of races together and we'd been volunteering at some races together. There was sort of an energy to being at the Ironman that was really cool. And we thought, okay, well, let's build a story around that. And it was just literally like we went camping and we just started talking about ideas about what this film could be. On the backside, I was like, okay, but I don't want to just like talk about this film and then it never happens. And so we kind of went the traditional route. We wrote a script, we built it together. We tried to do some crowdfunding to get started, which was good. It got us a couple of interested people in interested actors. It got us another production company who was interested in helping us make the film. But what was happening with that film was that it was getting to the point where like we initially entered into it with I was like, well, we could do this with we could just talk to triathletes and get them to play their own roles, almost like a mockumentary style film. They wouldn't be actors, but it's our first film, so it's okay. Like if we do something a little bit cool, a little bit fun, and we could do it basically with like a DSLR camera because the Canon 5D was out at that time, and it was like everybody. You knew you could make a movie now, and I was really inspired by those Ed Norton sort of like his style of films where it's like DSLR filmmaking, and I remember even working at Sanctuary, like Martin, we would go and get like some B-roll stuff sometimes, and he would just hand me his Canon 5D and say like, let's just shoot some like sky. And so I was like, okay, well, we can do that. But then we kept going down this road of like, getting pulled into this. Oh, this is a $2 million film. We should be doing this with stars and $5 million and all this other stuff. The budget kept going up because other people were kind of giving us lots and lots of good advice, well-intentioned advice, but I think also advice that kind of took away from the core of what we were trying to accomplish, or what we thought we were trying to accomplish. Because it got to a point where, once we hit the $2 million level, we started getting those questions of like, well, do you guys insist on directing it? And I was like, well, yeah, we kind of want to direct it. And then they're like, but do you want to build a career? Or do you want to direct this film? Both, actually. I kind of want to do both. And Helena was the same way. We were both, because we wanted to co-direct it together. And we built this story out of this idea of a guy and a girl. And they both they split up at the beginning of the film, spoiler, and they both go their own paths. And then something happens at the end. The idea was that Helena was going to direct all of the female side of the film, and I was going to direct all of the male side of the film. And it works out to roughly about 50-50 of it. And then, of course, we would co-direct the scenes where they were together. That was our concept going into it. We were like, this is how we want to do it. But of course, nobody's going to give us money to do that because that's a weird idea. And why would you do it that way? And we were like, well, we don't know. We don't know if it'll work, but that's kind of like, that's how we envisioned. We were sort of like we were kind of like fine-tuning our relationship at the same time as trying to figure out how to do this kind of film. But we both had our own perspectives of how we could of what our side of the film should be. And we thought that was a really good way to approach it. And people just kept saying like, well, you could be the writers on the film and the producers on the film, but then we would find someone else to direct it. And we're like, well, yeah, that might work, but then it wouldn't be what we wanted it to be. We thought, after 2 or 3 years of kind of wasted time, which really it felt like really wasted time.
And when was this? Like 2015, 2016?
Yeah. So we finished the script in 2013, finished the first draft in 2013. We started down this process for about 2 years till about 2015. And then in 2016, like we literally just said that we were like, it's never going to happen if we don't just start. This movie is built around two sides of a story, the guy's side and the girl's side, and how they view, what the relationship meant to them, and also how they view what the steps forward are going to be. And we're like, okay, well, let's just start with one of the sides. We don't even have to worry about the other side right now. And so we found two really great people, Jeff Gonick and Jovi Burke, who are both actors. We auditioned for both roles. We found some amazing, amazing people to play these roles, but we basically said, okay, Jovi became our Cora, who's the lead female, and Jeff was her sort of romantic interest-ish, but I'll leave it at that. You can watch the film to find out. And we were like, okay, so what scenes could we film with just them? Because they wanted to do it, and we had auditioned them, and we really loved them, and we thought that they were really good, right for the part.
You just dove in. You got your camera, you got the actors, and you just started shooting.
And we knew that there was the Ironman triathlon. It was there was a triathlon in Penticton happening. We went up to Penticton with them to the weekend of the race. And we filmed them in the village, and we filmed them at the race. And we got permission from the race to have Jovi put on a wetsuit and pretend like she was at the starting line of the race. And we got our director of photography, who was Sterling Bancroft, and we basically got a camera. We actually wound up getting we got a really good deal on Arri Amira, which is like a documentary style camera, that a high end documentary style camera, but shoots like raw and 4K and everything like that. We decided we were going to shoot this as though we were like just a documentary crew filming her. We filmed the first day of the film in August of 2016. Then we didn't film another thing until December. The point of this is that like basically this film took us almost 2 years of filming to complete. The great part about it was that it was built around this idea of a breakup that leads to both characters going their own direction, and then the film ends a year later in story time. So we thought to ourselves, okay, we don't have to worry about continuity, because if the actors need to do other roles and cut their hair or change their hair, great, works for us. The timeline's built in the story, it doesn't really matter. And so we started framing this out. We're like, okay, so how can we shoot this with our own money? We had some crowdfunding money that we had collected. We did 3 crowdfunding campaigns. Each of them got us like $5,000 a piece at any given point. And then we applied to Telefilm, and Telefilm rejected us, of course. And we just started filming. So we filmed on that August, and then we filmed another day in December. Literally, like 2 days before we saw that the weather report was going to snow really heavily that night. And we called up Jovi and said, "Could we do a running scene in the snow tomorrow morning, 5 a.m.?" And she was like, "Okay." Helene and I went to the store and bought like some running gear, like just like some gear that we were going to have her change into. So before anybody had even walked on the snow that day, that it was in December, like nobody's walked on the snow. It's perfect. We got her and us, the 2 of us and a friend of ours, to hold the camera. And for basically the morning until the sun came up, we drove around Burnaby, wherever we could drive that wasn't snowed over. And we would just get Jovi to run on a path with the snow in the background. And then, so that was day 2. We didn't film another scene until February. And then we started to actually get legit and work on like, we'd film 3 days here, 2 days here. We got more actors on board to take on the roles. We finally cast our lead actor, Cameron. I think we cast him like 2 or 3 weeks before his first scenes, but we'd already shot 4 days with Jovi before that. And then we shot their breakup scene on his first day on set.
This is all amazing, and it's really interesting to know that like it took you 2 years to shoot this movie, and the way you put it together was just, again, what we've been talking about on this podcast, just going for it and getting it done. And who cares if you don't exactly have all of the money? If you have a little bit of money, you can still start shooting some things. You can still try to figure out how to make some things happen, and that's really, really great. And so taking all of this now about your first feature, and with where your company is at now and what you're working on now. And I want to talk about the Quiet Canadians here, but specifically this new studio model, I guess is a way to put it, or this new audience building model that we're all dealing with right now. Let's dive into that. So what are you doing right now with the Quiet Canadians and Habbathy Films in 2025? Like, how are you approaching this film? And tell us more about the film, obviously, and let's dive into those details.
So Quiet Canadians is like, it's a modern day Canadian spy thriller. That's basically the gist of the thing. And it's about a Canadian Black Ops agent who finds himself being targeted for assassination. And in trying to uncover who's targeted him for assassination, he uncovers corruption in the Canadian government and in the American government. And it's called The Quiet Canadians. It's based on a book actually written by a person that we talked to a few years ago. It's all narrative. It's all fictional. So this is not based on a true story at all. But we read the book and we thought this could make a great movie. Now, the book was written about 20 years ago, so we've adapted it for modern times. We're doing a lot of research into modern tech and all this other stuff. So how we're approaching the film, the first thing we decided to do is we were like, okay, so first of all, do people want to see this? Can we get enough of a sample size of people who would like to see a movie like this, or who would be interested in seeing a movie like this? So we talk about the audience-focused approach to things. We were like, okay, well, spy thrillers, yes, no, but sometimes it's very star dependent and so on. And like obviously if you have Tom Cruise in your film, people might want to see it or something like that. Or if it's a James Bond movie. Well, this is a very relatively quiet intellectual property that doesn't have a lot of that to it. So what else can we bring to it that's going to make it bigger and better in scope and in feeling, and what's going to attract people to it? So one of the things we did was we said, okay, we're going to make this a cross Canada chase. Basically, it starts in Vancouver, it goes across the country to Ottawa, to Halifax, and so on. So we're going to take this film and turn it into a roadshow film where we tour the country almost as a movie. But the idea being that it's not, and again, it's not meant to be gimmicky in that way. Like, we created this story so that it like we have to go coast to coast. It only makes sense. The idea being then to create this visual landscape that very few movies ever present, unless they present it as this like see the Canadian country, supernatural this, supernatural that, with like beautiful scenery and everything like that. We want to go to all the cities and like film them in a unique and interesting way, the way that they've never been seen before. And the idea is to set key scenes in each city that actually like are plot driven and story driven and character driven. The production design, the visual elements, and all of that, the production value of the film comes from they have a scene here in Halifax that takes place they run by an iconic monument or something like that. It's like that taking that Bourne Identity, Mission Impossible idea and adapting it all for Canada, and then reverse engineering for us. How do we do it with the resources we have? We are trying to get more money for this. This isn't good just like, work on weekends and then pay for the crew. We know we have to get some more money for it. And what we're approaching that as is we're going, okay, so there demand for something like this. And one of the things we've done is we've done lots and lots of research, not just like market research by Googling it online, but we've actually talked to people and gone like, is this interesting to you? Is this interesting to you? And gotten a lot of like positive response from both Canadian brands who might be interested in putting their stuff in the film or being associated with the film, potential investors. And we've talked about, bringing investors on to to projects, and like, what do you offer them that isn't just ROI, but something else? And so this idea of like being part of a cultural investment, not just a financial investment. And then obviously leveraging the tax credits. And for us, a lot of this comes down to the researching of like, what do different provinces offer in tax credits, and how can we maximize the use of them in each place? And can we in fact do that? And then one of the rules that we set for ourselves is this has to be a 100% Canadian production. Every actor, every crew member, music, everything is going to be 100% Canadian. Even the brands that we have associated with it are Canadian. We want to make sure they're Canadian brands. Now, 2 years ago, I think this was a hard sell. This last year, it has become almost like you need to do it this way.
With the political landscape, what it is, the how Canadians have banded together with like national pride, of not becoming the 51st state and standing up for what it means to be Canadian.
Yeah, and the funny part is our story actually, I mean, without giving anything away about our story, but our story, without it even being intentional, because we wrote this not with the current political climate in mind, but we wrote it, and now we look at the story and we're like, the story, almost every theme in the story bases around this idea of national identity, this idea of also like differentiating ourselves from what America is versus Canada is. And that was not as a response to what's going on. This idea of this audience-driven, fan-driven approach to things is that we've worked elements into the script to kind of take advantage of certain ideas that come about because of the modern things that are happening. But we're also building that fan drive towards, oh, this film has to be made. This film has to be made now. We just did a casting call a month ago for the lead character and the top 3 supporting characters. We were working with our casting director, and she said, you guys are going to flip out when you see how many people have applied for this job, for these roles. And we are now looking at like almost like it's well over 700 people who've auditioned for these roles, and they're all Canadian, 100% Canadian. It just kicks me in the heart. Is every one of their slates, like when they slate for the camera, they say, my name is this, I'm blah 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 blah, I'm blah blah, I'm UBCP or whatever, this union, and then they say, and I am Canadian. And so we were talking about this the other day, and we were saying like it's this idea of like we're almost outing everybody. Like we're saying like, make your, be proud, say you're Canadian, because that's actually what we want. We want you to be a proud Canadian in this film. And I mean, ultimately in the end, like we're this is a spy thriller with, there's potential for franchise, all the franchising opportunities and things like that are obviously there. But the real key is like, we're like, look, like imagine if we were Eon Productions at the beginning of the James Bond series, taking a novel series by a relatively well-known author, but still not famous yet. Imagine if you're trying to put together this like Dr. No was the first film, so putting together Dr. No, and now you're looking for the X Factor actor who's going to play the lead role of James Bond. I was like, that's what we're looking for. And the great part, what we have discovered just watching some of the early auditions is not only our rephrasing is it's not that they have to be Canadian, it's that holy crap, Canada has so many amazing, talented actors to the point where we can't even like we've watched some of the auditions already, and it's going to take us a month to get through the ones that we've gotten so far. Like we're watching 3 to 4 hours a day, and it's still going to take us about a month. We did the math, and just to be able to see that, and so this just reinforces our idea that look, Canada needs its own thing. We are a great service industry. We have, and you and I both work in that service industry, but we need our own thing. Part of what this podcast and part of everything that we've been doing to talk about this, there's a lot of ways to fix it. There's a lot of ways to do the thing, but ultimately, in the end, what we need is we need to create films that engage and entertain, but also start to fill in the gaps of what does it mean to what is Canadian identity? What does a Canadian film really mean? And the great part about that is that we don't have to make it monolithic. As people have been saying lately, it's like what differentiates Canada from the States? The States is a melting pot. Canada is a mosaic. Because Canada is a mosaic, it means that all of our films do not have to be the same. But what we need to do is we need to elevate them. These films need to be the kind of films that internationally people want to watch. So what we've decided to do with this fan-driven approach is we're getting people interested in the film before we've made it. So building the audience right now. And we've had podcasts with like Darren and Darren Smith and some other people who are like building that audience right from the start. That was never a question for us, but now we're like really leaning heavily into it. Like this casting call, the fact that it brought us 700 audition tapes, like that's people putting time in, like actors putting time into preparing something for us, and people and we've had actors literally saying, I really want this role, like in their slate. They're like, I really resonate with this role. I would love to do this role. This is great. And a lot of people say that, but I'm like, I really feel it through what we've been watching. To honor that, we're also honoring it by like we're watching every single one, because we're like, look, if someone put the time to put in, we're watching it. We're making sure we give them every ounce of our attention at all times. But the great part about that is it shows just the sheer demand for fun Canadian films or good Canadian films to be a part of, not just to be a part of, but I think also to watch. And so we were talking the other day, and one of the things we're doing now is we're also thinking about like, okay, so we've got the beginning parts figured out. Helene and I, because we've been producers and we can ADs, we know how to structure the film. The hard part now is how do we get it out to people? So we're already planning the theatrical release of the film, festival or no festival. We want it to do obviously as well as it can do, but we're planning how we're going to roll out the theatrical, what that's going to mean.
Are you talking to distributors right now, or are you planning to self-distribute theatrically?
Yeah, well, we're indie. Like we were saying before, we're like, what we're going to do is we're going to create a plan for how we want this film to go out, and we're going to see who wants to come on board the plan. We're creating our own theatrical plan, our release plan, how we plan to do it, basically a windowing plan for our film. We're going to fine tune it, make it really good, make it very much about honoring the fact that what we want to do is we want to make sure that we want to do the roadshow theatrical, but we've got other plans for how that's going to work. And we're going to take our distribution plan to people who can help us execute that, who might be in better positions to execute that. And we're going to say, this is what we want to do. Can you help us do it this way? Not let them tell us how they're going to do it. We have smart people around us. Like we brought in a couple of producers, Leah and Tegan. Tegan's worked in marketing. She's an actress, and she's done marketing all, for the last 10, 15 years. She's built a marketing company. She understands marketing. She understands the film industry and producing, and she's been an actress in the film industry since she was a kid. And then Leah has been a production coordinator. She's producing a lot of indie films and so on. And so everybody's bringing to the table this sort of wealth of experience. But what we've said is that there are no sacred cows in this business. Whenever someone tells us, well, this is the way you're supposed to do it, we're like, well, why? You have to tell us, you have to explain to us why that's a good reason to do it. So we're not discounting distributors. We're not discounting any of that, sales agents or anything like that. And this isn't meant to be a middle finger to any of them. It's more to say, look, like we don't think we're smarter than everybody, but what we do want to do is we want to sit there and say, look, like if indie film has a hard time breaking through, it's because we haven't figured out how to break through yet. And the only way to figure out how to break through with more independent films is to come at it from a different angle. You have to come at it differently. You have to basically say, well, what makes sense? And for us, this makes sense.
Yeah, the way I'm looking at it as well, we're on the same page here, with my own film. Not that we've gotten this question, but I'm sure it'll come up eventually. It's like, well, why don't you hire, this person who's been doing this for 30 years this way? And I'm like, well, the model that this person is used to doesn't work anymore. So we actually need to find people who can find different ways in and different ways to do things. And that's the way that I'm looking at this. And like, just because a distribution model worked this way for the last 60 years doesn't mean that it's going to work for this film now. And it's a bit of the Wild West out there. So really start to question, why is this happening? Why is it this way? And how do we cater it for our film and for our project?
Yeah, and if you're going to fail, fail on your terms. The one thing we'll point to always is that if we make a mistake, or if we make lots of mistakes, we've made lots of mistakes. We made lots of mistakes on 13 Miles. I made lots of mistakes making that documentary. But the mistakes I made are my mistakes, and the great part about that is you learn from your mistakes, but then you pivot. And if you're going to fail, fail on your terms. Don't fail because someone else took it from you. And then I hear so many filmmakers come back to us. Everybody I've talked to comes back and says, we wanted to do it this way, but they felt it would be this way. And then it didn't turn out, or it didn't go the way we wanted it to. Well, then we need to take control of it all. And again, I'm happy to take advice from people. I just don't. I'm not smart enough to do this all on my own, and that's why I have partners. That's why I have friends and people who I look up to and mentors. You said it perfectly. Like, it's been done this way for 30 years. It might have worked in 1990, but it doesn't work now, or it might not work now. It's not working the same way now. YouTube didn't exist 30 years ago. Streaming didn't exist 30 years ago. DVDs existed 30 years ago. They don't exist now. A lot of the models are built around the idea of you getting that theatrical release that leads to a pay-per-view deal and then some DVDs in a Blockbuster shelf one day. And that's not around anymore. So if we're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, we're fighting a battle that can't be won. I think for us, the opportunity exists because the technology is there. With the prohibitive stance on making a film so many years ago, even when the Reds came in, it's like it was just so expensive still. We have LED lights now, right? Like we have whereas before we had all these much bigger lights. And I'm not saying that if you have the ability to use professional, like, more bigger lighting systems, and it makes sense for your story, by all means go ahead and do it. But a lot of what we've set up is built around this idea of you needed a big crew because you shot on film. The film needed to be exposed properly, and everything needed to be done in a very specific way and you were also shooting on film, which meant you weren't going to see the footage for 3 days after you shot it. Well, we can see the footage immediately. We can do a lot of things differently now than we did when we first started making films. It doesn't, you can take some of the best practices of filmmaking and apply them to today's model, and take what YouTubers are doing and basically how are they producing their films. And I'm not saying we need to make YouTube videos, but how are they making their stuff? Like, what technology are they using?
Yeah, the filmmaking process has been democratized, right? And so the fact that all of the equipment now is affordable, it's within reach. The focus is not now, can I get my hands on a camera and make a movie? That's easy. Now it is, what's the best film I can make? Because, like, and that comes down to story. First of all, you have to be able to tell it, because now the flood of movies out there. Even I scroll through Netflix and all the streamers, and I'm going, there are so many movies. Why are there so many movies? First of all, like, not all of them are good. And I get it. But we should all have a chance to make movies. But because there are so many, it really comes down to storytelling. But then on top of that, almost more importantly, is how do you get me to click on your movie or go see your movie in the theater now? And so, in way more of a sense, it's about marketing. Because, like we've talked about before, distribution's easy. I can throw my movie up onto YouTube. How do I get people to watch it? And this also ties into the whole AI argument about people freaking out over Google's VO3 or whatever that is, and AI making movies. And I'm like, you're going off of the assumption that just because it's created that it will be watched. An AI video still has just as much of a problem of being seen as any other person making a video. It's just another creator. And so I'm like, and first of all, it doesn't look as good as real life, and the acting is dead, and people are blown away by the audio and video versions of VO. And I'm like, this is some of the worst acting I've ever seen. It's dead. There's nothing to it. So it still has a long way to go. It's lifeless. So again, just because it's created doesn't mean that it will be watched. Right now, the biggest problem that we're facing is
Marketing and standing out as a good film. Like we've talked about this. It's like, well, what would be success for Quiet Canadians? Success is We make the movie for a budget that allows our investors and the people, the stakeholders in the film, to make their money back plus a profit. Knocking it out of the park is they make 10 times their investment back. But the other part of the success is we make a film that stands the test of time, is recognized as being a well-made film. And so I think you said they say what is the number one thing on a film is the story worth watching. And that's number one. Second is the execution of it. And yeah, the tools are there to the technical advances are there that can make it a lot easier these days. But I would put a really solid cinematographer on anything I did, because if the cinematographer and the key creative team help execute that story in an excellent way, not just in a this fits way. Like we can all make mediocre movies. Like that's fine. We can all try. I say we have an obligation now to try to hit it out of the park with every single movie we make it the best thing we can possibly do. And if we fail again on our own terms. If we try to hit it out of the park and it doesn't work, you know what? You tried, it didn't work, but you still tried. You took a risk, and I'd rather have a film that was universally hated than a film that was universally ignored. And so, that's the thing where it's like when we talk with our cinematography, we talk with everything. It's like, be daring. Like just because you get the typical action movie music in your films, like let's not look at typical action movie music in our film. If I type in AI and get AI to create a score for me, they can create a score for a spy film. But it's going to be just like every other score that's out there for spy films. It's going to be a merging of all these things with a little Mission Impossible here and a little James Bond here and everything like that. It's like, well, okay, so if that's possible, then 20 people can do that at the same time. What's going to make ours better? It's story, acting, and the execution of all the pieces together. What makes a best picture in my mind is something that brings all the elements of a film together and in one cohesive element: the music, the production design, the costumes, stunts, and then it all serves the story. And then you give it to the actors, and the actors are like, they are the best production value of any movie is good actors in your film, because without that, I'm not saying stars, I'm saying good actors, like people who can actually imbue the roles that you give them and bring life to it all. And that's the thing. AI can't bring life to it. AI is as good as me reading the dialogue from my script. I am not AI can if we just need someone to read the dialogue from the script and pretend to act out the pieces, I could do that myself. I need my Sean Connery out there to really like bring the charm and the charisma and the joie de vivre to that role, because that's what's going to inspire people and engage people and make people want to come and watch it, make people want to watch it 4 times. That for me is what our bar should be. That
I love the points you're making. I totally agree. And I'm very excited to see this movie and to learn more about it as you go through development and pre-production. And we'll be talking about it more on this podcast. But this has been a really great deep dive into everything you have going on. It's super exciting. Because you threw this at me last week, and we usually ask our guests, what is one piece of advice that you have for an up-and-coming filmmaker?
My first piece of advice is, like, don't worry about trying to impress people. Like, I think what I found out early on in all of the story that I'm telling about how I kind of got burged into this is that, like, I thought I had to prove myself to people, and I had to prove that I was talented, that I knew what I was doing, and that I could, fake it till I made it. And I think that the real truth is that the most valuable thing that you can be on a film set is someone who can solve problems, someone who shows up on time, and someone who treats people well. And I think that if you take those 3 things into account on every job that you do and every role that you take on a set, I think you're going to go much further than trying to impress people with your next idea or impress people with how good you think you are. I found value in people who bring those things to the table. And I think that when I have seen any kind of success for myself, it's because I brought those traits to the table. I showed up, I tried to be helpful and useful, and I always try to treat people well, wherever they are on the hierarchy. Yeah, and I mean, you're going to face so much rejection and so much, disappointment in this business if you're as a dreamer, and because we're all dreamers and so on. So, like, you have to treat this as an endurance sport. So, put your miles in, build compound interest with those 3 traits, like showing up early. It doesn't seem like much. Showing up, being ready to work, solving problems, and treating people well. That's putting money in the bank, and you just never know where that's going to end up later. Like it can serve you well all the way.
On that note, thank you so much. That was great.
Thank you so much. This was fun.